Your grandmother stood at the counter with 2 slices of bread, half a jar of something from the back of the icebox, and enough hunger to make it work. That was Tuesday night. No recipe card, no cookbook, just whatever she could press between 2 slices of white bread and call it supper. Number 22 used nothing but a bag of potato chips crushed flat between 2 pieces of bread, and children lined up for it. The sandwich at number 6 started with leftover gravy poured over bread in a skillet, and it carried families through winters that felt like they would never end. And number 11 took root in one Massachusetts mill town so deeply that diners there still serve it today. These were the meals people made when the grocery money ran out before the week did. Here are 30 lost sandwiches our grandparents ate to survive. Number 30. The sugar sandwich. 2 slices of white bread, a thin layer of butter, and a heavy sprinkling of granulated sugar folded shut. That was it. In homes across the Midwest and the Deep South, this was what children ate after school when the pantry held nothing else worth eating. The butter kept the sugar from spilling out. Some families used brown sugar instead. Others added cinnamon if they had it, which turned it into something that almost felt like dessert. But this was not dessert. This was the meal between meals, the thing that kept a child quiet until supper was on the table. Mothers made them without thinking. Children ate them without complaining, and the whole thing cost less than a penny. Number 29. The sardine sandwich. A tin of sardines packed in oil, mashed with a fork onto a piece of bread, maybe a squeeze of lemon or a few rings of raw onion on top. This was a working man's lunch in the 1940s and 1950s, especially along the eastern seaboard where canned sardines cost next to nothing. The tin fit in a coat pocket. The bread came from yesterday. You ate it cold on a bench or on the tailgate of a truck, and you did not complain about the smell because everyone around you ate the same thing. Sardines packed more protein percent than almost anything else on the shelf. A man could work a full shift on one sardine sandwich and a thermos of black coffee. Before I go any further, for those of you who have been cooking from these old recipes and want more of them gathered together, I put together the Vintage Recipe Guide. You can find it on my website, vintagelifestyleusa.com. I will not bring it up again. If it sounds like something you would use, it is right there. Now, back to the list. Number 28, the mustard sandwich. Yellow mustard spread thick on white bread. That was the whole recipe. During the Depression, families who had run through everything else still had a jar of French's in the cupboard because mustard lasted forever and cost almost nothing. Children brought these to school wrapped in wax paper and ate them fast so nobody would see. It was the sandwich people made when they were too proud to ask for help and too hungry to skip a meal. Some added a slice of raw onion if one was left in the bin. That bite of heat and acid tricked the stomach into thinking it had received something real. It had not, but it got a person to supper time. Number 27. The potato sandwich. Cold fried potatoes from the night before, stacked between 2 slices of bread with salt and pepper. This was common across Appalachia and the rural South, where potatoes were cheap and bread was cheaper. Some families mashed the potatoes first and spread them like butter. Others sliced them thin and layered them. Either way, the sandwich was dense, filling, and plain. A dab of mustard lifted it, but most people ate it bare. The potato sandwich was not a recipe anyone wrote down. It was a solution. You had leftover potatoes, you had bread, and you had a long afternoon ahead. Put them together, wrap it in a cloth, and go. Number 26. The potted meat sandwich, Armour or Libby's, the little flat cans with the pull-tab lid. You spread the paste on white bread with a butter knife, and that was lunch. The ingredient list read like a riddle, and nobody looked at it twice. Potted meat cost a few cents a can, kept without refrigeration, and stretched across 2 or 3 sandwiches if you spread it thin enough. Workers carried it to the factory floor, to the field, to the construction site. The taste was salty and faintly metallic, and people either loved it or tolerated it because the alternative was nothing at all. It was survival food in a commercial label. Number 25. The syrup sandwich. Karo syrup or sorghum molasses poured onto a slice of bread, folded in half, and eaten over the sink because it dripped. In the rural South, this was breakfast, lunch, and sometimes supper. Families who grew their own sorghum had an endless supply. Those who did not could buy a bottle of Caro for next to nothing. The sweetness hit fast and hard, and on an empty stomach it felt like fuel. Some mixed the syrup with a pat of butter and stirred it into a pale golden paste before spreading. That was the fancy version. The plain one, the one dripping down your wrist, was the one people actually ate every day. Number 24. The tongue sandwich. Beef tongue, boiled for hours until the outer skin peeled away, sliced thin, and laid on rye bread with mustard. This was a deli staple from the 1920s through the 1960s, especially in Jewish delicatessens in New York, Chicago, and Philadelphia. Tongue was cheap because most shoppers walked right past it at the butcher counter. The texture was dense and smooth, closer to roast beef than anything else in the case, and the flavor was richer than cuts that cost 3 times as much. It disappeared from most menus, not because the taste changed, but because a generation grew up that could not get past the name. Number 23. The cheese dream. An open-faced sandwich made with a slice of American cheese on white bread, sometimes with a tomato slice or a strip of bacon, run under the broiler until the cheese bubbled and browned at the edges. This was the original grilled cheese before anyone called it that. Home economists in the 1930s and 1940s promoted it as an affordable, protein-rich supper. The name came from the way the melted cheese puffed under the heat, like something rising in a dream. You ate it with a fork because the cheese was too hot to hold. 1 slice of cheese, 1 slice of bread, 1 person fed. Number 22. The chip sandwich. A handful of potato chips pressed between bread with a smear of butter to hold them in place. The crunch was the whole point. Children made these after school without being told. Salt, fat, and starch hit every craving at once. Mothers looked the other way. In parts of the Midwest and the South through the 1950s and 1960s, this was so common nobody thought to name it. But by the time snack aisles doubled in size and after-school routines shifted to microwaved meals, the chip sandwich quietly disappeared. Today, most people under 40 have never heard of one. It was not a recipe. It was a moment, and that moment belonged to a kitchen that no longer exists. Number 21. The bean sandwich. Leftover pinto beans or navy beans mashed with a fork and spread on bread like paste. Some added chopped onion or a spoonful of chili powder. This was a staple in Mexican-American households along the border and in families across the South who cooked dried beans by the potful every week. The mashed beans soaked into the bread and made it heavy and filling, which was the point. A pot of beans cost almost nothing and lasted for days, and the sandwich was how you used the last scraping from the bottom. 2 of these and you were full for hours. It was plain, it was quiet, and it kept people going. The survival sandwich was never meant to be remembered. It had no recipe card, no photograph in a magazine, no place on a restaurant menu. It existed because bread was the cheapest thing in the house, and whatever went between the slices was whatever had not run out yet. Families did not talk about these meals afterward. They were evidence of a week that went wrong, a paycheck that came up short, a season that gave less than expected. But the sandwich did its job. It filled a belly. It got a child through an afternoon. It let a grown person work a full shift without stopping. And when the hard time passed, people put those sandwiches behind them and never spoke of them again, which is exactly why so few survived into the next generation. Number 20. The head cheese sandwich. Sliced head cheese on rye bread with mustard or horseradish. Head cheese was made from the head of a pig, simmered for hours until the meat fell apart, then pressed into a loaf with the natural gelatin holding everything together. Butcher shops sold it by the slice, and German, Polish, and Czech families across the Midwest ate it cold on sandwiches for lunch. The texture was firm, with bits of meat suspended in clear jelly. Most people today would not touch it. But when nothing from the animal went unused, head cheese was a practical way to use parts that had no other place to go. Number 19. The olive loaf sandwich. A processed lunch meat studded with pimento-stuffed green olives, sliced thin and laid on white bread with mayonnaise. Oscar Mayer and other brands sold it at every grocery store deli counter from the 1950s through the 1980s. The olives gave it a salty, briny bite that children either loved or refused outright. There was no middle ground. Mothers packed it in lunchboxes because one package made sandwiches for a full week. Olive loaf sat in the deli case next to bologna, and for a generation of children, it was as ordinary as the bread it came on. Today, it is nearly impossible to find. Number 18. The mayonnaise sandwich. White bread, a thick layer of Hellmann's or Duke's, and absolutely nothing else. This was the sandwich people do not like admitting they ate. But in the South especially, when the icebox was bare and the bread was fresh, a mayonnaise sandwich was a meal. The fat content alone made it filling. The tang of the vinegar gave it just enough flavor to keep you eating. Some added salt and black pepper. A few put a leaf of lettuce on if the garden had one. But the real version was just bread and mayo, and the people who grew up on it will tell you it was not as bad as it sounds. Number 17. The bread and dripping sandwich. After the roast came out of the oven on Sunday, the drippings stayed in the pan. Brown, salty, thick with rendered fat and the caramelized bits of whatever meat had been cooked. On Monday morning, when the roast was gone and the leftovers were running thin, someone spread those cold drippings on a slice of bread and ate it standing at the kitchen stove. This was standard practice in English, Irish, and Scottish households that brought the tradition to America. In coal towns across Pennsylvania and West Virginia, in steel towns along the Great Lakes, in farming communities where a single roast had to feed a family for a week, the drippings were not waste. They were a resource. The bread soaked them up like a sponge, and the flavor was deep and savory, more concentrated than the roast itself because everything had reduced in the bottom of that pan. Some families kept a dripping jar on the back of the counter the way other families kept a sugar bowl. Beef drippings, pork drippings, chicken drippings, all saved and layered and spread on bread for workday lunches. The jar sat by the stove and never went empty because every time a piece of meat hit the oven, the jar got replenished. Nobody wrote this sandwich down. No home economist promoted it. No magazine photographed it alongside a glass of milk and a checkered napkin. It was the meal you built from the memory of a better meal, and it carried the ghost of Sunday dinner into the rest of the week. Children who grew up in those houses can still describe the color of the drippings in the jar, the way it changed shade depending on whether the roast had been beef or pork or a stewing hen. By the time disposable aluminum pans replaced cast iron roasters and vegetable oil replaced animal fat in most kitchens, the dripping jar vanished from the counter, and with it went one of the most honest sandwiches anyone ever made. Number 16. The chopped olive sandwich. Green olives chopped fine and mixed with cream cheese, spread on white bread. This was a church luncheon standard, a ladies' bridge club staple from the 1930s through the 1970s. The cream cheese softened the brine of the olives, and the combination was salty, tangy, and rich for something so cheap. Women made trays of these for every gathering that required finger food, cutting the crusts off and slicing them into neat triangles. The filling kept for days in the icebox, which made it practical for a week of school lunches too. It was elegant and economical at the same time, which is why it appeared everywhere, and then, without anyone noticing, stopped. Number 15. The butter and sugar sandwich. A thick slice of bread spread with soft butter and dusted with white sugar. That was the entire recipe. During the Depression and well into the 1950s, this was what mothers handed children when the pantry held almost nothing else. The butter gave it richness, and the sugar made it feel like a reward, even when it was born out of necessity. In mill towns across Pennsylvania and the factory neighborhoods of Detroit, children carried these to school wrapped in wax paper. By the 1970s, as packaged snack cakes and store-bought cookies took over, no one reached for the sugar bowl anymore. The butter and sugar sandwich slipped out of the American kitchen so quietly that most families forgot it had ever been there. Number 14. The cream cheese and jelly sandwich. A thick smear of Philadelphia cream cheese on one slice, grape or strawberry jelly on the other, pressed together and cut corner to corner. This was the sandwich mothers made when they ran out of peanut butter or when a child would not eat it, which happened more often than anyone admitted. The cream cheese gave it substance, the jelly gave it sweetness, and together they made something milder and richer than the standard version. It was a lunchbox constant through the 1950s and 1960s, and some families swore it was superior. By the 1980s, it had mostly disappeared, replaced by snack packs and juice boxes. But the people who ate them still remember exactly what they tasted like. Most of these sandwiches were eaten alone, not at a table with the family, but standing at the counter, sitting on the porch step, leaning against a truck at the job site. The survival sandwich was a private act. You made it quietly and you ate it without ceremony because drawing attention to it meant admitting the cupboard was bare. There was a dignity in that silence. A person feeding themselves from almost nothing is not failing. They are solving a problem with what they have. Every one of these sandwiches represents a decision someone made to keep going, to not skip the meal, to not let hunger win the afternoon. That quiet stubbornness is worth remembering, even if the sandwiches themselves are not. Number 13. The fried brain sandwich. 2 slices of thick white bread around a pile of sliced calf brains, battered in egg and cracker crumbs, fried in lard until the outside turned golden and the inside stayed creamy. This sandwich fed factory workers and Rivertown families across the Ohio Valley from the 1890s through the 1970s. In Evansville, Indiana, and across the river in Henderson, Kentucky, diners served brain sandwiches the way other towns served burgers. You walked in, sat down, and ordered one with mustard and pickled onion. The brains were cheap because nobody with money wanted them. A butcher practically gave them away, and a single calf brain stretched across a dozen sandwiches. The texture sat somewhere between scrambled eggs and custard, rich and soft, with a mineral taste that mustard cut through perfectly. Hilltop Inn in Evansville kept them on the menu for decades, and regulars ordered nothing else. Then bovine spongiform encephalopathy changed everything. The fear of mad cow disease in the 1990s pulled brain meat off menus across the country. Most diners stopped serving it overnight. A handful of places in southern Indiana still fry them today, but the sandwich that once anchored a working lunch in every river town quietly disappeared from almost everywhere else. The people who still remember it do not talk about the taste first. They talk about the price. It was the cheapest hot sandwich on the board, and it kept you full until supper. Number 12. The mock chicken salad sandwich. No chicken in it at all? The base was usually ground veal or pork, sometimes crackers soaked in broth, mixed with mayonnaise, celery, and a squeeze of lemon. It looked like chicken salad and spread like chicken salad, and if you did not know better, it came close to tasting like it too. Depression-era cooks invented it because chicken was expensive and the imitation cost a fraction as much. The recipe appeared in community cookbooks throughout the 1930s and 1940s, always with a tone of cheerful practicality. Some versions used hard-boiled eggs as the base. Others used leftover pork roast run through a hand-cranked grinder. The name carried no shame. Mock meant resourceful. Number 11. The chow mein sandwich. A hamburger bun split open, topped with a ladle of thick chow mein, eaten with a fork and knife over a plate because the gravy ran everywhere. This sandwich belongs to Fall River, Massachusetts, a mill city where Portuguese and French-Canadian workers filled the factories. In the 1920s, Chinese restaurant owners near the textile mills began serving a thick, gravy-heavy chow mein made with celery, onions, bean sprouts, and ground pork. They ladled it over rice at first, but the bun version became the lunch counter standard because it was faster to eat with your hands between shifts. The chow mein was cooked dense enough to hold its shape on the bread, seasoned with soy sauce and celery salt, and priced so a 12-hour worker could afford it without thinking. Church suppers in Fall River put it on the table next to baked beans and brown bread, and nobody raised an eyebrow. It was not Chinese food, and it was not American food. It was what happened when immigrant cooks fed immigrant workers in a town where everybody needed something hot, filling, and cheap. A few diners in Fall River still serve it, though the mills closed generations ago. Order one anywhere outside Bristol County, and you will get a blank stare. The bun soaked through if you let it sit, So you learned to eat fast, which is exactly what someone on a half-hour break needed to do. That speed made it practical, the flavor made it a habit, and the fact that it never left its hometown made it one of the most local sandwiches in the country. Number 10. The cold biscuit and fatback sandwich. A leftover biscuit from the morning, split open and stuffed with a strip of fried fatback. No butter, no condiment, no garnish. This was a field lunch across the rural South, carried in a pocket or a tin pail to wherever the work was. Fatback was the cheapest cut at the butcher. A solid slab of pork fat with no meat on it at all, sliced thin and fried until it curled and crisped. Inside a cold biscuit, it was salty, rich, and dense enough to keep a person going through a full afternoon of labor. It was not a meal anyone chose when better options existed. It was the meal that was available. Number 9. The pepper loaf sandwich, a processed lunch meat made from ground pork and beef mixed with cracked black pepper and pimento pieces, sliced thin at the deli counter and eaten cold on white bread. It sat next to bologna and olive loaf and head cheese, and it was one of the cheapest options in the case. The pimento gave it small, bright spots of red, and the pepper gave it just enough heat to hold your attention. Children ate it in school lunches without complaint because the flavor was mild and the texture was soft. Pepper loaf has vanished from most deli counters today, pushed aside by turkey and roast beef. But it fed a generation of children whose parents bought lunch meat by the pound. The food companies figured out early that a family spending its last dollar on bread would spend its last nickel on something to put between the slices. So they made potted meat and olive loaf and pepper loaf and canned sardines, products that cost almost nothing to manufacture and lasted on the shelf for months. These did not compete with fresh meat. They competed with hunger itself. The companies understood what cookbooks never admitted. Most survival meals are not cooked. They are assembled. 2 slices of bread, something from a can or a jar, and the will to keep eating. The sandwich is the architecture of getting by, and the American grocery aisle was built around that fact. Number 8. The salmon salad sandwich. A can of pink salmon drained, mashed with a fork, mixed with mayonnaise, sweet pickle relish, and a stalk of celery diced fine. Spread on bread, it fed 2 people from 1 small can. Canned salmon sat in nearly every working-class pantry through the 1940s and 1950s, and the salad version stretched it further than croquettes because you needed no eggs, no flour, no frying oil. Women served it at card parties and packed it in lunch pails. The taste was mild, faintly smoky, and the celery gave a crunch that made it feel like more than it was. But fresh salmon became affordable by the 1990s, and suddenly the canned version carried a stigma it never had before. The salmon salad sandwich vanished from lunch counters and church spreads alike, traded in for something that looked better on a plate but never fed a family the same way. Number 7. The apple butter sandwich. Apple butter spread thick on a piece of bread, folded in half, eaten standing up. In Appalachian kitchens and across the rural Midwest, apple butter was cooked once a year in copper kettles, stirred for hours with a long wooden paddle, and jarred by the dozen. A single batch could last a family from October to April. The sandwich was breakfast, lunch, and sometimes supper when the garden was bare and the smokehouse was empty. Children grew up on the taste of slow-cooked apples and cinnamon between plain bread, and it filled them when nothing else could. By the time store-bought jams and jellies lined every grocery shelf, families stopped making apple butter altogether. The kettles went to yard sales, the paddles ended up in antique shops, and the sandwich that kept entire households fed through lean winters disappeared with them. Number 6. The gravy sandwich. Leftover gravy from the night before, reheated in a skillet, ladled over a piece of bread on a plate. Sometimes a second slice went on top, soaking through until both layers turned soft and heavy. Nobody planned this meal. It happened when the roast was gone and the gravy was all that remained. On Monday and Tuesday nights, that leftover gravy carried the flavor of whatever bird or shoulder it came from, and the bread caught every drop. You ate it with a fork, you ate it hot, and nothing stayed on the plate. But the gravy sandwich depended on a kitchen that cooked a roast every Sunday. And when that tradition faded, so did the Monday gravy. By the time weeknight dinners came from boxes and drive-through windows, there was no leftover gravy to pour, and no reason to lay a piece of bread flat on a plate and call it supper. Number 5. The crackling sandwich. Pork cracklings, the crispy brown pieces left after rendering lard, tucked between 2 slices of bread with salt. During hog killing season, families across the South and Appalachia rendered their own lard in cast-iron kettles over open fires, and the cracklings were a byproduct nobody threw away. Crisp, salty, and deeply flavored, they were eaten by the handful straight from the kettle. But the sandwich stretched them further. The bread softened the crunch and the salt coated your mouth. You did not need more than one to feel full. The crackling sandwich was tied to a life that required butchering your own animals, which is why it disappeared when that practice did. Number 4. The condensed milk sandwich. Sweetened condensed milk spread on bread like jam, thick, sticky, impossibly sweet, and filling in a way that plain bread never was. This was a Depression-era standby and a wartime ration trick because a can of condensed milk lasted weeks and stored without refrigeration. Children treated it like candy. Adults ate it when there was nothing else sweet in the house, which during the 1930s was often. The milk soaked into the bread and turned it dense and almost cake-like. One sandwich quieted a child for hours. A single can made enough for a dozen sandwiches, which meant dessert for a week on a few cents. Number 3. The cold roast pork sandwich. Thin slices of leftover pork roast, cold from the icebox, layered on bread with salt and maybe a smear of mustard or apple butter. This was the Monday sandwich in households that roasted a shoulder or a loin on Sunday. The meat went further cold than it ever did hot because thin slicing stretched a small piece across 4 or 5 sandwiches. The fat had set overnight and added a richness that softened the moment you bit through the bread. It was simple, filling, and completely dependent on having planned ahead the day before. Nobody called it a recipe. It was just what Monday looked like in a house that had done the work on Sunday. The cold roast pork sandwich was proof that someone in that kitchen knew how to make one good day carry the rest of the week, and that knowledge was worth more than any cookbook ever printed. Number 2. The ketchup sandwich. Heinz ketchup on white bread, 2 slices, nothing else. This is the sandwich nobody talks about, the one people made in the dark and ate before anyone else woke up. Ketchup was tomato and sugar. Bread was flour and water, and together they produced the barest possible version of a meal. Children who grew up on ketchup sandwiches do not mention them often because the sandwich carries a weight that goes beyond food. It meant the kitchen was truly empty. It meant every other option had been exhausted, and yet people ate them and carried on with their day because hunger does not care about dignity, and a ketchup sandwich, however bare, was still something. Number 1. The lard sandwich. A slice of bread spread with plain white lard and dusted with salt. The simplest sandwich on this entire list and the one that carries the most weight. Lard was the cheapest fat in America for over a century. It came from the hog, and in households that raised their own pigs, it cost nothing at all. When there was no meat, no cheese, no eggs, no vegetables, and no money to change any of that, there was still lard and there was still bread. This sandwich meant you had reached the bottom of the pantry and the bottom of the week, and you were still feeding yourself. That act, the refusal to stop eating, the decision to sit down with the plainest food imaginable and call it a meal, was not poverty. It was endurance, and every one of our grandparents understood that. When times grew tough in Depression-era America, families turned to preserving foods, making homemade spreads like apple butter, a prized pantry staple. The apple butter and cheese sandwich, a modest pairing of homemade apple butter and thinly sliced cheese, became a favorite because it cleverly combined 2 readily available ingredients into a filling, flavorful meal. Apple butter, a concentrated sweet spread slowly simmered from bruised or imperfect apples, allowed families to make use of fruit that otherwise might have gone to waste. Apples were abundant and inexpensive during the fall harvest, So resourceful home cooks preserved them carefully to ensure supplies lasted through harsher winter months. Cheese, although slightly more precious, was often rationed in thin slices, stretching each small block to maximize meals without emptying the purse. Cookbooks of the 1930s praised apple butter sandwiches as a satisfying way to provide necessary calories cheaply, perhaps quietly suggesting they tasted better than some other thrift-driven concoctions. Now this one came out of left field, unless you grew up near a Chinatown diner. The Egg Foo Young sandwich was one of those things that made 0 sense on paper, but the second you took a bite, you stopped asking questions. Start with an egg patty, crispy on the outside, soft on the inside, and packed with bean sprouts, green onions, maybe a little chopped pork or shrimp if you got the good kind. Then came the gravy. Not just poured, but drenched. Thick brown gravy ladled right over the patty until it practically dripped off the sides. Slide the whole thing into a hamburger bun, close it up, and prepare yourself for the kind of meal that laughs in the face of napkins. It was heavy, hot, and heartwarming. The Egg Foo Young sandwich felt like the kind of invention you only make when you are really hungry and just messing around in the kitchen. But in the 1970s, this was a lunchtime legend for anyone who knew where to find it. Of course, if you were not lucky enough to live near a place that served one of these, you probably grew up with something even saltier, way more military, and still showing up on diner menus today. You have not seen experimental until you have seen a tuna and apple sandwich. Exactly what it sounds like and worse in reality than in your imagination, a tuna salad mixed with chopped apple slices on white bread. Yes, that is literally the entire concept. And no matter what the fusion food crowd tries to say, we are not trying it or buying into the hype. If only to satisfy the curiosity inside us and scratch that must-try-everything itch would we want this back. But strangely, people in the 70s had the opposite opinion. Cans of Pink Lady tuna and Farmer's Market apples were apparently their idea of a good meal back then. Do you think they were onto something? Maybe we are jumping the gun and should take a note out of their book about being open to new tastes. Throughout the hardships of the Great Depression, creativity in the kitchen became as vital as bread itself, leading to culinary experiments that modern taste buds might find curious. Among these unusual creations was the humble yet surprisingly refreshing cucumber and sugar sandwich. Thinly sliced cucumbers lightly dusted with sugar, sandwiched between slices of bread. Sugar may seem extravagant for the 1930s, yet households often had small reserves carefully rationed for moments exactly like this, transforming bland cucumbers into something akin to dessert. Garden cucumbers, prolific and hardy, grew abundantly, becoming the unsung heroes of many Depression-era meals. Interestingly, cucumbers were favored because they matured rapidly, providing a dependable source of nutrition when pantry staples were uncertain. Clever homemakers discovered sprinkling sugar over cucumbers masked their watery blandness, turning a simple vegetable sandwich into an affordable treat. Even kids who usually avoided vegetables happily ate it. In fact, this unlikely pairing became popular enough to feature in homemaking pamphlets of the era, billed as a sweet sandwich children would actually finish. Now this one had drama. The tuna boat melt was not just a sandwich, it was an event. You start with a sub roll, soft in the middle, split open like it is waiting for a miracle. In goes a scoop of tuna salad, but not the watery kind. This was chunky, mayo-rich, maybe with a little celery if you were lucky. Then come the tomato slices, thin, juicy, and laid down like armor. And finally, cheddar cheese, shredded, sliced, whatever worked, blanketing the whole thing like a warm hug. Slide the whole sandwich under a broiler and wait. That is the moment things change. The edges of the bread crisp up, the cheese bubbles and browns, and the tomato softens just enough to soak into the tuna. You pull it out just in time to stop it from burning, but almost wish it had. This was the sandwich version of comfort food theater. It smelled like warmth. It looked like golden perfection. It tasted like something way fancier than it was. Parents made it to use up tuna, but kids remembered it like a feast. But if this one was golden, wait until you meet the sandwich that vanished from lunch counters just as fast as it appeared. Equally offensive to most conservative taste palates were pineapple and cheese sandwiches. As of 2024, it is a well-established fact that the West and pineapples have had a very troubled relationship. Pineapples try their best for America, and America acts like an alcoholic husband that cannot notice his wife even on their anniversary. Back in the 70s, this was still a new culinary ground people were treading, just like ham and banana sandwiches. What they found was that it did not have the potential to go very mainstream, but it could grow itself a strong, loyal, and niche following. Most fans of this sandwich were in Hawaii, but in surrounding states, the trend took off moderately successfully. People loved the overly sweet and oddly comforting sensation of the sandwich, and we can see why. Pineapple and cheese sandwiches sound oddly delicious if you really think about it. Corn has long been the reliable companion of American families, especially during the economic struggles of the 1930s. Frugality in the Depression-era kitchen meant nothing was wasted. Every spoonful mattered, leading to innovative dishes like the creamed corn sandwich. This sandwich featured leftover creamed corn thickened just enough to spread between slices of bread, transforming last night's side dish into today's main event. Corn was abundant, affordable, and deeply woven into American culinary heritage, so turning leftovers into sandwiches wasn't merely thrifty, it was practical culinary genius. Homemakers quickly realized that leftover creamed corn, thickened slightly with flour or stale breadcrumbs, could yield a surprisingly tasty sandwich spread. Creamed corn sandwiches became a clever way to feed large families without extra expense, all while sneaking in essential nutrients and fiber. Historical pamphlets even encouraged homemakers to use corn creatively, describing it humorously as the vegetable that kept giving, since families would see it repeatedly at meals, sometimes more than they wished. You knew the Red Devil logo before you ever tasted it. That Underwood deviled ham can have a certain energy to it, bold, strange, and just a little too happy for what was inside. Still, one taste and you got it. Deviled ham salad was the low-key hero of school lunches and late-night sandwiches. It was creamy, salty, a little tangy, and just weird enough to make you wonder how it became so popular. Mix that canned meat paste with mayonnaise and relish, maybe a dash of mustard if you were daring, and you had a spread that knew how to work a slice of white bread. It was chilled, it was comforting, and it stuck to the roof of your mouth like a secret you could not wait to tell. This was the kind of sandwich you did not brag about, but secretly loved. And it was there for you, on road trips, in brown bags, and even at midnight when you could not sleep. It never looked fancy, but it never needed to. Deviled ham was a flavor bomb dressed up like a cold cut. But if you wanted something a little fresher, a little more deli-style, then nothing hit quite like a stack of corned beef with a side of slaw and just enough spice to make you pay attention. What we cannot get are chicken salad and grape sandwiches. Seriously, what was the vision here and who signed off on it? Honestly, the most action this dish saw was when it was the weekend, and there were only leftovers and some odd assortment of fruits at home. Places like Rhode Island still had a fan base for the flavors this sandwich had, especially in early 1970s, and the highlight here really was the chicken salad. Not something you would have to enter a food coma, but definitely something you want if you are counting calories. Health-wise, this was probably the best sandwich you could get back then, when the alternatives were grease-loaded behemoths or experimental train wrecks. Most of the lovers of chicken salad and grape sandwiches dwindled a lot over the years, and now it is just a memory. In the 1930s, leftovers weren't something you tossed. They were tomorrow's lunch. That mentality gave birth to dishes like the cold baked bean sandwich, a Depression-era staple composed of leftover baked beans spread generously between bread slices. Though beans today might evoke images of summertime barbecues, in Depression kitchens, they symbolized frugality and survival. Beans were economical powerhouses, affordable, nutritious, and easy to cook in large batches. Families routinely simmered huge pots, using beans for multiple meals, stretching their budgets and pantries to their absolute limits. After hot bean suppers, resourceful homemakers cleverly repurposed any remnants, spreading them cold onto bread to create an easy, protein-rich sandwich for lunchboxes the next day. Newspapers of the period promoted beans as an essential pantry staple, boasting about their nutritional benefits and cost-effectiveness, while quietly ignoring their less glamorous qualities, perhaps for the best. Oddly enough, baked beans in sandwiches wasn't an entirely new idea. British households had long enjoyed bean buddies, proving thriftiness travels well. There is nothing tidy about a sloppy Joe, and that is the whole point. These school cafeteria icons had one mission: to hit like a flavor bomb and leave a trail behind. Tangy ground beef cooked with tomato paste, onions, and whatever seasoning the lunch lady felt like using that day. Scooped in a steaming pile onto soft hamburger buns that were usually a little too small. You would take one bite, and the filling would slide out the other side like it was trying to escape. Your hands? Covered. Your tray? A disaster. Your smile? Huge. They were sweet, salty, savory, and just chaotic enough to make lunch feel like a party. Even the name sounded like something you should not be allowed to say in class. Sloppy Joes were not reserved for fancy moments. They were served with plastic forks and half a chocolate milk carton. But they became legendary. Maybe it was because they tasted like comfort food mixed with rebellion. Or maybe it was just the fact that no one ever got through one without needing extra napkins. Either way, it earned its place in the Sandwich Hall of Fame. But what if I told you there was a sandwich out there that combined egg, gravy, and a hamburger bun, and somehow made it work? Olives might not make a comeback anytime soon in today's world, but they will return on the list with egg and olive sandwiches. Like we said, olives were starting to get really hot as the ideal sandwich topping. Adaptable, flexible, and cheap is all you want out of an accessory to your sandwich. Like those fancy earrings that go perfect with your dress, olives and eggs went together like a Cupid-certified match made in heaven. People went wild around the mid-1970s for hard-boiled eggs and salted olives in their sandwich, green or black. Black olives got a bit more traction with eggs though, whereas greens synergized better with peanut butter. Would you ever try a sandwich that consists only of an egg and a fruit? By the way, you did know olives are fruits, right? During the Great Depression, food scarcity pushed resourcefulness to new heights, turning even backyard weeds into life-saving nourishment. A prime example was the dandelion greens sandwich, made from tender, freshly foraged dandelion greens sautéed briefly in bacon drippings or butter, proving the old adage true: one person's weed is another person's lunch. Dandelions flourished freely, thriving on roadsides and lawns, offering a nutritious, vitamin-rich option readily available to anyone willing to forage. Interestingly, dandelions weren't always considered nuisances. Settlers historically cultivated them for their nutritional value, containing more iron and calcium than many grocery store greens today. During the Depression, families who knew this little fact relied heavily on these wild greens to fill nutritional gaps left by their otherwise sparse meals. With fats like butter or precious bacon drippings in short supply, home cooks learned to carefully ration these staples, just enough to tame the green's natural bitterness. Ironically, modern gardeners battle relentlessly against dandelions with chemicals and lawnmowers, unaware their ancestors would have gladly turned that lawn invasion into supper. The patty melt was not just a sandwich, it was a lifestyle. It belonged to truck stops, corner booths, and places where the waitress calls you hon. Start with a beef patty, not too thick, not too thin, grilled until the edges charred just enough. Then pile on caramelized onions so sweet they practically melt, and drop a couple of slices of Swiss cheese on top until it oozes over like lava. But the crown jewel? That rye bread, buttered and toasted right on the griddle. It soaked up everything: the beefy drippings, the onion sweetness, the crispy edges of the cheese. Every bite was a perfect mix of crunchy and gooey, salty and buttery. You were not just eating a sandwich, you were biting into pure diner energy. People had this at lunch and still talked about it at dinner. If your parents ever made this at home, you were one of the lucky ones. And if not, you probably still remember your first time trying one and realizing a sandwich could actually stop time. But not every sandwich needed to be hot off the grill. Some came cold, weirdly fancy, and straight from the pages of a church cookbook. Pickles come in pairs with olives, so it is only right to mention cream cheese and olive sandwiches next. Cream cheese was an ingredient that was already a staple in many American homes because of its popularity in desserts around the 1970s. Olives are, well, olives, and if you do not have a bottle always ready to go, you need to reevaluate your grocery shopping list for this month. Mixing the two made both substantially better, like those power-ups Iron Man gets whenever he puts on a bulkier suit. If people felt really fancy, they would put the olives on the stove for a while and have them fried. Not only was it great on its own, but people also did not stop at just frying. Both of them made for really awesome toppings on meat-based sandwiches. We would not mind seeing more olives on our plate today for sure. They are a classic we feel work in any era. In a time when food waste was practically unthinkable, even potato scraps found their way onto dinner tables as an ingenious sandwich filling known as the fried potato peel sandwich. During the Great Depression, resourcefulness wasn't just admired, it was essential for survival. Potato peels, typically discarded today without a second glance, became the surprise stars of family meals when frugal cooks discovered that frying them crisp and sprinkling a touch of salt transformed kitchen waste into an affordable delicacy. Potatoes were abundant, inexpensive, and nutritious, making them a cornerstone of Depression-era cooking. Yet their peels often held valuable nutrients, something homemakers recognized instinctively, long before modern nutritionists praised potato skins as vitamin-packed. Clever cooks stretched resources by saving these peelings, crisping them to crunchy perfection, and layering them between slices of bread for a sandwich that was satisfying, flavorful, and, importantly, dirt cheap. Remarkably, newspapers and food columns of the 1930s openly suggested frying potato peels to add bulk and nutrition to scarce diets, turning desperation into culinary inspiration. The club sandwich was never shy about making an entrance. This was the sandwich equivalent of wearing a tuxedo to a barbecue. Triple layered, cut diagonally, and always served with a cocktail toothpick jabbed right through the middle like a victory flag, the classic clubhouse was a masterclass in controlled chaos. You had turkey, ham, and bacon stacked with lettuce, tomato, and mayonnaise on white toast, then doubled up like it had something to prove. One bite, and you got the salty crunch of bacon, the cool snap of lettuce, the savory chew of ham, and that creamy mayo keeping everything glued together. It was tall. It was filling. It was an edible tower of American lunch pride. You could find it at diners, roadside motels, airport cafes, and your Aunt Linda's house on a Sunday afternoon. No one ever finished a club sandwich without looking like they'd just solved a puzzle. Picking it up was half the battle. Eating it cleanly? Impossible. But satisfying? Always. This was the sandwich you ordered when you wanted to feel like you were doing something important. And while this one wore its sandwich royalty crown proudly, the next one took a completely different route, turning cheap lunch meat into the closest thing we ever got to pizza on a bun. Sardine and mustard sandwiches are as basic as they sound and much better than you might initially give them credit for. Be realistic and think about a post-Depression era America where a lot of neighborhoods and homes were still reeling from the effects. Dollars could buy a bit more and went back to their usual strength, but everything was a bit touch and go for a while, and dishes like sardine and mustard sandwiches were the cure. Even more attractive than the taste was the price of this beauty, because for about $1.50 you had yourself a solid meal. Many labor workers, like your friendly neighborhood forklift or dock workers, might remember eating these during their lunch breaks. People would usually spice it up with other vegetables, toppings, and peppers to make a proper feast out of a cheap thrill. And we would like to join the fun too. In the bleak economic landscape of the 1930s, the trusty carrot, often abundant and dirt cheap, was quietly elevated from supporting actor in stews to star ingredient in sandwich spreads like the carrot marmalade sandwich. Homemade carrot marmalade spread generously over stale bread might sound peculiar today, but during the Great Depression, it showcased a brilliant combination of thriftiness and culinary creativity. When sugar became scarce and costly, innovative homemakers cleverly utilized carrots' natural sweetness, simmering them slowly into a thick, jammy preserve to mimic traditional fruit marmalade. Notably, carrots were among the most reliably available vegetables during the Depression. Their hardiness meant nearly anyone could cultivate a patch, even with limited gardening skills. Families often had surplus carrots, providing an ideal solution to the era's pervasive hunger. To avoid waste, stale bread, previously destined for the compost heap, was refreshed by this sweet and slightly tangy marmalade, transforming it into an unexpectedly pleasant treat. Despite its humble origins, carrot marmalade gained popularity, prompting home economists of the time to distribute official recipes for this vitamin-packed, budget-friendly spread. If you were a regular at lunch counters in the 1970s, there was one cold cut that had a mysterious charm: pickle and pimento loaf. It had a look that was hard to ignore. A pale pink meat dotted with bright green pickle bits and tiny flecks of red pimento, like a mosaic made by someone who really loved sandwiches. It came sliced thin from behind the deli glass, slapped between white bread with a dab of mayonnaise, and wrapped in wax paper with a soda on the side. You did not question it. You just ate it. The flavor? Tangy, savory, and weirdly sweet, but not in a bad way. It had the texture of bologna, the bite of pickle, and the color scheme of a Christmas tree. For some reason, it vanished from most grocery shelves by the end of the decade. Maybe tastes changed, or maybe we just stopped putting pickles inside our meat. But back then, it was an easy go-to, a bit of fun, and a total conversation starter if you pulled it out during lunch break. Of course, if you thought that sandwich was messy looking, just wait until we dive into the one that was literally impossible to eat without getting sauce all over your hands and loving it. A basic two-ingredient combo like meat spreads and cheese would continue making their mark with dishes like salami and cream cheese sandwiches. Salami itself was something that Italian-American communities heavily popularized in America around the early 1900s. Restaurants would take the trend and turn it into a surefire facet of American cooking in the 70s with easy and accessible ideas like salami and cream cheese sandwiches. If it works in restaurants, then the next step to making it a long-lasting memory is to make it simple enough for people to eat at home. Cream cheese, some salami, and white bread understood the assignment perfectly, and despite fading away later on, were a beloved sandwich. If you had any Italian family or were in a primarily European neighborhood, you could definitely expect to catch a whiff of these around the block. Maybe cheeses used to be stronger then? Either way, we would love to try this sandwich from the 1970s. For American families battling tight budgets during the Great Depression, innovation became the true mother of necessity, especially when pairing unlikely pantry items like peanut butter and pickles. The peanut butter and pickle sandwich, featuring crunchy peanut butter generously layered alongside sliced dill pickles, was one clever response to empty cupboards. Peanut butter surged in popularity during the 1930s, partly because it provided inexpensive protein at a fraction of the cost of meat. Pickles, meanwhile, represented resourceful preservation, allowing frugal households to stretch cucumber harvests throughout the entire year. Combining these affordable staples, home cooks found the creamy, salty peanut butter balanced perfectly with the tangy bite of dill pickles, making an oddly delicious sandwich. Notably, newspapers of the Depression era often recommended peanut butter sandwiches precisely for their nutrition, calling them a poor man's steak, while pickles added zest, vitamins, and some much-needed crunch. Though today's diners might initially raise an eyebrow at this unusual duo, peanut butter and pickle sandwiches weren't considered oddities back then. There is something dangerously comforting about mixing bacon grease with anything sweet, and that is exactly what bacon and apple butter on white bread was. You take crisp, salty bacon, still warm from the skillet, and press it into a slice of soft white bread that has been generously smeared with apple butter. That is it. No lettuce, no cheese, no rules. The combination was 100% homemade magic. It tasted like fall mornings, cast iron skillets, and someone's grandma telling you not to eat too fast. Apple butter gave it this rich, spiced flavor that clung to your mouth just long enough for the bacon to come crashing through. It was smoky. It was sweet. It was not trying to impress anyone. The real win here was in how it reused leftovers. If breakfast was done, and you had a few stray strips of bacon and a jar of apple butter on hand, this sandwich practically made itself. The kind of thing you whipped up while the coffee was still brewing. Maybe it never made it to a diner menu, but it made it to enough hearts to matter. And speaking of sandwiches that mattered, let us talk about the skyscraper of cold cuts that ruled every diner plate with a toothpick flag on top. Ever heard of a peanut butter and pickle sandwich? While both pickles and peanut butter are popular choices for bread-based goodness nowadays, there was once a time when people mixed the pickles into the peanut butter to make a sandwich. Around the 1970s, the peanut butter and pickle sandwiches really started taking off, particularly dill pickles. Something about the spice and tang of a pickle added a lot of character to a basic peanut butter sandwich. It helped that a sandwich loaded with vegetables was always more filling. On a budget or on an energetically challenged day where you cannot get yourself out of bed, this sandwich worked wonders for the masses. We definitely want this one back in lunchboxes and fridges in many states like the good old days. At a time when pantries were sparse, one modest vegetable quietly rose to culinary prominence, notably paired with vinegar to create the onion and vinegar sandwich. Thinly sliced onions marinated in tangy vinegar with just a pinch of sugar might sound like a questionable lunch choice today, but during the Great Depression, this humble sandwich was a household staple. Vinegar, cheaply produced and easily accessible, became an indispensable tool for Depression-era cooks trying to stretch limited ingredients into flavorful meals. Onions thrived effortlessly in backyard gardens, making them abundant even when money was scarce. But onions had another appeal. Their sharp bite helped mask the taste of stale bread, a constant companion during hard economic times. Home cooks discovered that marinating onions briefly in vinegar not only mellowed their pungency, but also produced a refreshingly tart flavor, transforming the simplest sandwich into a delicacy. Remarkably, onions were so valued that Depression-era food guides suggested planting them as an emergency food supply, alongside potatoes. This sandwich perfectly encapsulated the ingenuity of an era when resourcefulness wasn't merely admirable, but essential for survival. Imagine being 8 years old and opening your lunchbox to find chopped olive and cream cheese on pumpernickel. Either your mom was ahead of her time, or she found an old cocktail recipe card and just went with it. This sandwich was salty, tangy, creamy, and somehow kind of grown up. You had green olives chopped so fine they could sneak into your taste buds before your brain caught on, mixed with cream cheese until it was a spread so thick it stuck to the knife like it had a mission. All of that smeared onto a slice of deep dark pumpernickel that practically demanded you respect it. It was not flashy, it was not sweet, and no kid was trading their cookie for it, but it had an edge, the kind of flavor that got better the more you chewed. Somewhere along the way, this party appetizer snuck into lunchboxes, Tupperware, and even a few kitchen counters at 2 in the morning. It was strange, but it made sense. The 70s were weird like that. Spreads were suddenly sandwiches and finger food was fair game. Of course, if you thought cold spreads were wild, wait until you see what happens when tuna salad goes face to face with a broiler. Peanut butter and bacon sandwiches might be a little ironic considering what we just talked about, but one thing they most definitely are is downright delicious. We know you are imagining it as you watch the video, and that is okay because, honestly, same. Crispy fried strips of bacon lathered in thick peanut butter are enough to get anyone's mind going. In the 70s, peanut butter and bacon sandwiches were the standard American breakfast, and they may have even started the stereotype of the US being a nation of bacon heads. When you get to the plates of every household in 50 states, you can claim a piece of culture for yourself too. Peanut butter and bacon sandwiches remain in the Food Hall of Fame, and there was nothing like a fresh sandwich off the pan in the 70s. One surprising sandwich, the radish and butter sandwich, combined thinly sliced radishes, easy-to-grow root vegetables thriving in even the poorest soil, with creamy butter, salt, and homemade bread. Despite its simplicity, this sandwich exemplified the era's remarkable ingenuity, transforming modest garden staples into a genuinely enjoyable meal. Radishes were incredibly affordable and grew rapidly, maturing within just 3 to 4 weeks, making them ideal for families in urgent need of sustenance. Butter, although a luxury in lean times, was often stretched sparingly, providing much-needed calories and flavor to otherwise plain sandwiches. Interestingly, radishes weren't always considered sandwich-worthy. Historically, they were seen as garnishes or mere rabbit food. Yet, necessity shifted this perception dramatically during the 1930s. Resourceful home cooks discovered that pairing crunchy radishes with salted butter masked the vegetable's peppery bite, turning a somewhat unpopular garden produce into something palatable, even delightful. Creamed chipped beef on toast, or as anyone who ever served in the military will tell you, SOS. No, not a cry for help, though it looked like one. This was dried beef, shredded and stirred into a thick, milky white sauce with a bit of pepper and sometimes a touch of Worcestershire if you were fancy. Then it got spooned over toast, or biscuits, or whatever bread you had. It was a direct descendant of World War II rations. But by the 1970s, it had made its way into American homes, school cafeterias, and greasy spoon diners across the country. It was salty. It was creamy. It looked like a mistake, but somehow it kept getting made and loved. It was affordable, filling, and tasted better than it had any right to. Parents made it because it used cheap pantry ingredients. Diners served it with coffee refills. Kids ate it because they did not know any better, then grew up craving it again. It might not be pretty, but it is unforgettable. Still, not everything on this list is heavy. Some sandwiches were just simple, clever ways to use what was left on the breakfast table, and a little sweet on the side. Bologna and cheese sandwiches were sandwiches that you could pull out of the refrigerator and have nobody raising any eyebrows, only happy smiles and eager stomachs. Bologna spreads were not too popular in America until the 70s when they first properly started picking up some steam. People got on the bandwagon once bologna and pepperoni pizzas started becoming regular takeout options in states like New York and Chicago. If it works on a pizza by the laws of nature, it must be tried on a sandwich or burger too. We are not sure who came up with that rule of thumb, but they were really onto something, because this made for a great sandwich that was a meal people ate when all there was for dinner was sleep. While a lot of those cheeses and spreads got discontinued now, we would love to try an authentic sandwich from the 70s because it sounds right up our alley. In Depression-era America, homemakers learned quickly that flavor often resided in the drippings left in their skillets. Bacon grease, now casually discarded, was prized as liquid gold, giving rise to imaginative dishes like the lettuce and bacon grease sandwich. At first glance, combining crisp lettuce with bacon drippings might seem contradictory, like ordering a diet soda with your large fries, but during the lean 1930s, it made perfect sense. Bacon, when affordable, provided protein, but every precious drop of rendered fat was meticulously saved in kitchen jars for future meals. Lettuce, on the other hand, was a garden-friendly crop, inexpensive and abundant, offering essential freshness and vitamins. Clever cooks of the time combined these humble ingredients, lightly dressing freshly picked lettuce leaves in warm bacon grease, sprinkling them with salt, then sandwiching them between bread slices. Surprisingly delicious, the grease transformed mundane lettuce into something savory and satisfying. Historical cookbooks and government-issued pamphlets frequently promoted bacon fat as an affordable seasoning, suggesting it could practically perform culinary miracles. Now, bologna is not what you would call glamorous, but in the 1970s, someone took that humble meat and turned it into a straight-up miracle. Enter the bologna pizza sandwich. This was not a joke, it was genius. You start with a soft hamburger bun, maybe left over from the weekend cookout. On the bottom half, you lay down a slice of bologna, and if you are doing it right, you give it a quick sizzle in a frying pan so the edges curl up like a little meatball. Then you spoon on tomato sauce, canned, homemade, whatever you have, and top it with shredded mozzarella. After that, into the broiler it goes. What comes out is pure nostalgia with melted cheese dripping down the sides and the edges of the bologna just crispy enough to give it bite. It smelled like school lunch and after-school cartoons. This was a sandwich that did not care what anyone thought. It was pizza-inspired, budget-friendly, and full of attitude. A little greasy? Sure. A little weird? Absolutely. But no one ever forgot their first one. but if bologna in a broiler felt like a stretch, get ready for the canned spread that showed up in lunchboxes, picnic baskets, and every pantry with a shelf of shame, and somehow stayed beloved. Ham and banana sandwiches are less digestible both literally and figuratively than most of the list, but they actually worked quite well. The trick was in how you sliced them, because if the banana slices were fat and thick while the ham was thin, you would have a really overly sweet sandwich. Meanwhile, if you did the opposite, then you would have a mushy sandwich that did not have any real flavor. If you did get the proportions right, and most people did after their first few tries, then you had a 70s DIY delicacy with simple ingredients. It made sense why most people did not know how to make a good one, because it was not common. People who lived in other decades hated fruit and meat mixes of savory dishes, but they had a lot more room to make an impression with the crowd in the 70s. Maybe people felt very tropical for a decade? The sandwich would be quite an interesting addition in menus today. Back in the harsh realities of the Great Depression, families turned to pantry essentials that delivered calories and sweetness without breaking their limited budgets. Enter the humble yet hearty molasses sandwich. Thick molasses, generously drizzled onto slices of bread and occasionally sprinkled with salt, emerged as a popular lunchtime choice, not just out of necessity, but because it provided a rare moment of sweet indulgence during tough times. Molasses, a byproduct of sugar refining, was affordable and accessible, often stored in large tins kept in kitchen pantries, becoming as familiar as flour or potatoes. Resourceful Depression-era homemakers appreciated that molasses offered not only sweetness, but essential nutrients like iron, magnesium, and calcium, long before modern health experts rediscovered its hidden nutritional punch. To combat monotony, some households cleverly balanced the syrupy sweetness by adding a pinch of salt, creating a flavor combination intriguing enough to make molasses sandwiches feel like a treat rather than a compromise. In fact, molasses was such a dependable Depression staple that families jokingly called it their liquid gold, humorously acknowledging its value while dreaming of better days. You know it is serious when your childhood lunch starts with a loud sizzle. Fried bologna and mustard was never supposed to be a star. It was just something people made when they ran out of ideas or groceries. But it had that wild card charm. Thick-cut bologna, the kind with that red plastic skin you had to peel off, got tossed on a hot skillet until it puffed like a mini volcano. It would curl at the edges, crispy and brown, and just when you thought it was done, it would start to sing. Slap that onto a slice of Wonder Bread, squeeze on yellow mustard like you mean it, and top it with another slice. No lettuce, no tomato, no distractions. This was the sandwich that knew what it was. It smelled like school lunches and weekend trips to the lake. It was cheap, easy, and always hit the spot. Nobody was trying to impress anybody with this. But somehow, it never let you down. The meat might have been humble, but it had attitude, and the mustard made sure it got noticed. Now, if that one felt like a memory, wait until we talk about the sandwich that brought the diner straight to your house, griddle grease and all. No one does comfort food better than Americans, and the iconic potato chips and cheese sandwich is proof. People would grab cheddar or mozzarella cheese and a packet of Frito-Lays or a can of Pringles and get busy at the table but not in the kitchen. Reason being, this was one of those 10-minute dishes that took absolutely no effort or time to make, like instant noodles. Barbecue-flavored chips would be preferred, because they added a secondary flavor, but all kinds were used and the crunch was just to die for. In the 1970s, chips like Pringles were getting more and more popular in America, and that made it even easier for this to take center stage. What would follow in the decades after was a growing concern for health, and people stopped making their favorite potato chips and cheese sandwiches, but we would love a 70s plate. Exotic fruits like bananas became virtually unattainable luxuries during the economic hardships of the 1930s, prompting desperate yet brilliant substitutions from ordinary American pantries. Enter the mock banana sandwich, cleverly disguising boiled mashed parsnips sweetened with sugar and a dash of artificial banana flavoring. Parsnips, previously overlooked root vegetables that thrived in backyard gardens, found unexpected stardom in this culinary sleight of hand. Housewives quickly realized their earthy taste softened when boiled, making them surprisingly receptive to imitation fruit flavors. Banana extract, once used sparingly in desserts, was suddenly celebrated for turning humble parsnips into a believable tropical treat. It's ironic that parsnips were elevated from root cellar obscurity to sandwich fame simply because real bananas became too costly for most American tables. Historical records show these sandwiches appeared regularly in Depression-era cookbooks, praised as creative alternatives that allowed families to maintain dietary variety despite limited budgets. Of course, modern taste buds might question whether parsnips truly captured the banana experience. After all, impersonating fruit is tough business. But many Depression-era children reportedly enjoyed the illusion enough to ask for seconds. Now we are talking classic. Corned beef and coleslaw on seeded rye is one of those sandwiches that knew how to make an entrance without raising its voice. You would find it wrapped in wax paper at your local deli, or sitting proud on a tray next to a pickle spear and a bag of chips. The corned beef was thin-sliced but packed with punch, salty, tender, and just fatty enough to remind you this was not diet food. Then came the slaw. Not too creamy, not too dry, with just the right crunch to cut through the richness of the meat. Pile that high between two slices of seeded rye, sturdy, peppery, with that classic bite, and you had something special. This was the kind of sandwich that told you to sit down and take your time. It did not rush. It did not play games. It was the kind of thing you ordered when you wanted to feel like an adult, even if you were still wearing platform shoes and listening to disco on cassette. Deli counters made legends, and this one was a heavy hitter. But if corned beef was too bold for your taste, there was always its milder cousin, the quiet, sweet-talking ham salad that somehow became a staple without anyone noticing. Spam and pineapple sandwiches, on the other hand, are a Hawaiian invention that makes some stomachs less audible. On the other hand, if you are anything like us, then maybe the blend of spices, fruits, and canned pork and ham will create a unique flavor trip for you. Spam and pineapple sandwiches in the state of Hawaii would usually be accompanied with things like mango slices or mango chutney, peppers, chili pastes, and fresh coleslaw. All of this really elevated the dish and gave it a strong identity to pull from when it was making impressions on people for the first time in the 70s, and most were good ones. While pineapples are eternally hated in America, this is one mix of different foods that a lot of citizens could get in line for, and that is why we are sad to see this one gone. Those are the sandwiches, 30 of them, built from bread and whatever the house had left. If you grew up eating any of these, or if someone you loved made them when the grocery money ran short, I want to hear about it. Tell me which one your family made and what they put between the slices. If you have not already, go ahead and subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Until next time, this is James with Vintage Lifestyle USA.